This video talks about idealized indexing. Um, Professor Mapp in 78 said that the administrative efficiency of an instrument registration system and its indexing in particular is of enormous consequences to lawyers, other professional title searchers, and the public. And so essentially, national registration systems effectively act as land librarians, registering land change and indexing land knowledge to maximize retrieval. It's all about indexing. And technology and standards support title derivation through efficient indexing. So we have databases where structured and unstructured information retrieval is core to the indexing process. There is spatial indexing. And this is particularly important because we're dealing with land, which is in and of itself a spatial phenomena. Spatial information theory has provided highly efficient multidimensional spatial indexing techniques and standards. Things like the Land Administration Domain Model, ISO 19152, and other associated standards support effective data modeling. And by effective data modeling, we can start to articulate the core components which will be searched for in terms of the indexing process. So, how do you derive title from a well-indexed register of deeds? Well, as a buyer, a grantee, you want to understand: does the seller own the land? Do they have indefeasible ownership? What beneficial rights that you get as the new owner, i.e. what rights you have over other land, and what do third parties have over the land that you will own, for restrictions and responsibilities? So to determine the rights, restrictions, and responsibilities associated with a particular piece of owned land, the index needs to look at all the deeds that are affected and look at the legal implications, resolving them around that particular piece of owned land to derive the chain of title or the title deed. So when indexing has been well structured, a title can be derived from the main plot cadastral unit. So in the first instance, what we want to do is to confirm indefeasible ownership. So this is the identification of the party who holds the ownership right of the main plot cadastral unit, either from a chain of title or materialized in the cadastral map. Now, if we're doing it directly from deeds, it's doing it directly from a chain of title. So here we're looking at the original ownership granted by the Crown, and as it shifts through each of these different owners, as demonstrated in the public land register, and then indexed by the system to demonstrate that the current owner is that indefeasible owner. Now, in this instance, the cadastral map could materialize that chain of title, and so this would be a title of ownership, as it were. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. From that main ownership, what we can then start to do is to derive the subjects. So the main plot cadastral ownership and the ownership pertinence that are either exclusive or in common. Now, we talked about this in an earlier video. So here we have an example for a block of flats in Scotland. So we have our main plot cadastral unit, which is a strata right, exclusively owned. But because you own that strata right, you have a pertinential ownership right over another piece of principal land, which will probably be the footprint of the block of flats that you're in, and that's 50% ownership of that principal land, so it's probably a two-flatted building. But because you have an interest in that block of flats, you also have an interest in another piece of land outside, in fact two other pieces of land outside, one exclusively, one held in common, which gives you another half ownership of principal land externally and a quarter ownership of principal land. So you're bringing all of your inherited ownership together to articulate your subjects. You also want to look at the non-ownership benefits. And so these are then also looking at the pertinence associated with your own land, but in this instance, you're looking at your beneficial non-ownership rights. So that could be your rights of access or other such beneficial elements. You also want to derive rights that are held by third parties, the rights that encumber your land. Now, rights held by third parties have a spatial relationship with the spatial extent of these subjects that we've just defined. If the third party right is exclusive, then it is a restriction for the owning party. This includes ownership rights expressly held by third party. So ownership within land that you own is essentially a restriction because you no longer own it. Otherwise, it's a responsibility for the owning party. So here we are, deriving rights held by third parties. We look at our subjects. We see what the relationship of those subjects are in terms of their spatial extent. And then we can look at the deeds that describe rights held by third parties, non-ownership rights. So in this instance, we have three. We have a community deed. So this is defining a shared infrastructure relationship that benefit and encumber members of that community. So in this instance, you've got a block of flats here and a block of flats here, and there is a collective relationship between the two flats in terms of the shared walls, in all likelihood. Here we have a developer deed. So this was all part of one original development area, and a development put in a no keeping of chickens, which is enforced by all members of the community. And here we have an environment deed, which is of a larger area, and this is a smokeless zone. It's enforced by statute. So the spatial relationship between the subjects and these deeds articulates what areas of the subjects are affected and in what way. So in such a manner, title derivation is trivial because the register has been designed with indexing in mind. So the indexing and modeling is critical to this efficient cross-referencing and retrieval of information. So when this is legal ownership information, the need for effective indexing is increased. So what happens in a register which is not efficiently indexed? Well, title derivation becomes difficult. Demonstrating the chain of title involves the inspection of every legal instrument that relates to the land in question. You're doing, particularly if it's in paper, you're doing, GIS analyses on a paper-based system. That is very difficult. So the search then becomes onerous or error-prone. And that affects the chain of title determination to support indefeasible ownership, clear identification of any beneficial rights resulting from ownership, or the clear identification of encumbering rights held by third parties. That's particularly significant to the mortgage sector because if that information is lost in terms of title derivation, that has a significant potential impact on their ability to maintain a viable business. So there is a loss of credibility and social relevance. This is very important. So wouldn't it make conveyancing easier by using a registration process that guaranteed indefeasibility, thereby ensuring that subsequent transactions did not need to demonstrate the chain of title? And this is where Sir Robert Torrance and the registration of title comes in. And that's our presentation. That's coming up next.